Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our annual Yom HaShoah Commemoration. I'm Mary Pat Higgins, President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. It has long been a tradition for us to gather in a synagogue as a community to mark this important day. On a day when we remember the 6 million Jewish lives extinguished during the Holocaust, it is always a comfort to be together, to embrace, to grasp hands, to share memories. Tonight, though our commemoration is virtual, we will take comfort in the knowledge that our community is taking the time to honor this day. By joining us tonight, each of you is standing up to say that you will never forget those whose lives were cut short by unmitigated hatred. Together, we renew our vow of never again. Nights like tonight give me great hope for the future. We are living in difficult and often troubling times. More than ever, we are committed to our mission to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights, to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference. We want the museum to be a place where all can come through our doors and see themselves in the stories we tell, but also learn something new and perhaps gain a greater sense of empathy and appreciation for others. At a time when anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world, we look to the past to inform our future. We know what happens when hate permeates and polarizes a society. We know what happens when blame is misplaced and when that blame becomes a mission to destroy. We cannot ignore the very real challenges we face today: anti-Semitism, racism, and a society divided, but we will not back down in the face of hatred. Instead, we come together in this moment to choose acceptance, understanding, and respect. We look for the light in the darkness, just as our survivors have taught us to do. Even today, we don't have to look far. Over the past year, we have seen the extraordinary in what used to be ordinary acts, in our healthcare workers who have put the lives of others before their own, in our educators who have gone above and beyond to serve their students, and in countless other ways, others who have kept the world running at risk to their own health and well-being. To each and every one of you, we thank you. During this year of sheltering in place, of staying in to keep ourselves and others safe, home has become even more central to our daily lives. Home has been a respite from an uncertain world, a place to work and to play, and perhaps occasionally, a place that feels stifling. But the significance of home has undoubtedly been highlighted by the pandemic. It's often something we take for granted. The concept of a place that we can always come back to and where we can be safe. But the Holocaust destroyed the safety of home for millions. After Hitler came to power in 1933, the Nazis began stripping Jews of their rights. The right to work, the right to go to school, the right to sit on park benches and swim in public pools, the right to own property, and the right to citizenship. But it was not enough to remove Jews from the public sphere. Soon, even home was not safe, but a place where Jews could be searched, their belongings stolen, and their personal safety violated. For so many Jews, home became a place not to cling to, but to flee from. But for those European Jews who wanted to escape the ever-tightening noose of Nazi control, finding somewhere to go proved to be the greatest challenge. Tonight, we will hear the stories of 3 Dallas area survivors who faced immeasurable challenges as it became clear that their home was no longer safe. We will share their journeys of displacement, of searching, and ultimately of finding new homes and new lives in a new land. We are honored to continue the work of our survivors who, by sheer force of will, endured the worst of humanity to ensure the victims of the Holocaust are not forgotten. Before we begin, I would like to light the first memorial candle of the evening. I light this candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. Let our remembrance begin now with remarks from Rabbi Stefan Weinberg of Congregation Anshe Torah.
Thank you, Mary Pat, for your gracious words, and thank you for all you do to represent the Jewish community as the president and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. The museum and its mission to educate the next generation is needed now more than ever. The world is reeling. The pandemic has shocked us. The political waters in which we try to maneuver seem unnavigable. Wherever we look, we find division. We discover another reason to splinter. We appear to be obsessed with rivalry and enmity for each other. I wonder, where will this end? This evening, we remind ourselves where rhetoric can take us. It led to a madman's final solution in Nazi Germany 75 years ago. Words, they can heal and soothe as easily as they can enrage and incense an angry mass of people. Words can console and inspire, just as they can destroy life as we know it. No word in our Hebrew vocabulary bears more weight than the word Zachor. This evening we remember, we recall the pain. We refuse to let go of the horror that defined our lives such a few short decades ago. We retrace the steps of history. We remind ourselves of the many choices that preceded the rise of the Third Reich. We refuse to forget the role played by so many as the world our predecessors knew was transformed into something unimaginable. But most importantly, this evening, we remember those brave, courageous, loving souls who remain with us, the living members of our community who have first-hand accounts of the atrocities they witnessed. Tonight, we embrace the sanctity, the kedusha of this moment, acknowledging the precious value of life. I, like many of you, can see our survivors solemnly walking down the aisle of one of our shuls. Year after year, they sanctified this evening with their presence, their smiles, their indomitable spirit, and their dignified manner. Lighting a candle, telling a story, and vowing to never forget, they represent a link that will remain forever imprinted on our people's collective memory. A few weeks ago, I reread the story of my mother's experience during the war. Living in Frankfurt, Germany, a privileged lifestyle with a nanny, butler, and chauffeur, my grandfather owned Oppenheimer and Sons, a hat factory where he employed 150 people before the war. My mother recalled the arguments had by my grandparents. Should they flee or remain? My grandfather, an 8th-generation German, a decorated World War I officer with the Iron Cross we still have in our possession, argued, "This is my country. Why should we leave?" One day before Kristallnacht, he received a call from his war buddy, his commanding officer telling him, "Get out now." And with that call on November 8th, 1938, my mother and her family attempted to stay one step ahead of the advancing Nazi war machine. The harrowing stories of her escape route, time in a deportation camp, and 3 years hiding in the Pyrenees Mountains form part of the lore of our family's history. Why do I share this with you tonight? For one reason only. My mother, like so many of the survivors whose stories we all would listen to, repeatedly refused to abandon her appreciation for the blessing of life. Every time I hear another survivor's story detailing the progression of anti-Semitism's most horrific moment, I'm overwhelmed with his or her ability to embrace the promise of life. That too was my mother's gift to my sister, brother, and me. I'll never forget that message. Furthermore, I know that is why, amongst other reasons, Rabbi David Hartman wrote in 1982 a short essay entitled Auschwitz or Sinai. Yes, we will never forget, but we refuse to see the world exclusively through the lens of Auschwitz. We are reminded we must never use the moral argument associated with Auschwitz to assume a superior position to our brothers and sisters with whom we share this experience we call life. The only way we can afford to distinguish ourselves is with our actions, with our sense of morality, with an unyielding dedication to what is right and good and holy in this world. The words of Sinai, the holy texts of our people, the ethical principles that have inspired men and women across this globe throughout history must remain our anchor. May we, the people of the book, never lose sight of the rich tradition that is ours. Our sense of justice, our sense of righteousness has been a beacon of light throughout history. Now we, the next generations, must bear that torch with pride and passion. May the lessons taught by our survivors remain fresh and inspirational to each and every one of us. May their appreciation for life with all of its promise ever resound in our souls, compelling us to live our lives as a legacy, as a testimony to them, striving to heal where there is hurt, to unite where there is division, to support where there is strife, and to inspire where there is despondency, to recognize promise and opportunity where others prefer to see failure. Our world needs us, every one of us. Yehi zichram baruch. May their memories always be for a blessing. I now light this candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust.
My father, Walter, was born Wolfgang Julius Levy on June 9, 1922 in Ortelsburg, Germany. His father, George, was a successful salesman of work uniforms. His mother, Jenny, a homemaker, and he had a younger sister, Eva. My father and his family lived a pleasant life, and he doesn't remember experiencing anti-Semitism as a young boy. In 1932, my grandfather moved the family to Königsberg for a job promotion. The family quickly integrated into the larger Jewish community, attending services at both the Orthodox and the more liberal synagogue. My dad also joined Maccabi Hatzair, a Zionist youth movement. Dad did well in school, but things grew more difficult as Hitler came to power. He was bullied by his peers for being Jewish, often physically, though he felt their indifference more keenly than any physical abuse. Some teachers were pleasant, but others refused to call on him or actively espoused Nazi propaganda. In 1935, when my dad was 13, the principal recommended he be taken out of school because he could no longer guarantee his safety. That year, the celebration of my dad's bar mitzvah felt like the close of one chapter in his life and the beginning of a new, darker chapter. At this point, the outlook for his family became increasingly grim. His father was quickly losing customers as non-Jewish merchants stopped buying from Jews, either out of hatred or fear of repercussions, and Jewish merchants were forced to go out of business. The family moved to a smaller apartment and rented out a room to make ends meet. My dad remembers planning out routes to walk in town to avoid areas where he was more likely to be attacked. As their life became less safe, my grandparents began looking for a way out of Germany. Their initial goal was to go to what was then Palestine and is now Israel, where two of my grandfather's brothers had settled. At 14, my dad traveled to Ahrensdorf to participate in a Hashara program that trained him in skills needed to successfully immigrate to Palestine. He enjoyed the training, but had to leave prematurely when he developed a stomach ulcer. Back in Königsberg, Dad became a dental technician apprentice. By this time, it was becoming clear that the immigration process would be arduous, regardless of the destination. My grandmother took the initiative of contacting her American cousin, Jennings Stein, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, to see if he could help the family get out of Germany. Jennings would turn out to be the ticket out my father and his family so desperately needed. Because they had secured a sponsor, the United States quickly became the best option for escape. But this was only one step of many that had to be taken. My dad remembers the constant back and forth his parents went through, visiting one office and then another, presenting financial and medical records, only to be told they needed more. Whatever you brought wasn't enough, he recalls. The Nazi officials wanted more documentation of this and more documentation of that. But finally, after receiving permission to leave Germany, obtaining admission permits from the United States, booking passage on the American ship the Manhattan, and visiting the American consulate in Berlin for interviews and medical exams, my father and his family were ready to depart. The process took about 18 months, which my dad acknowledges doesn't sound that long in retrospect, but when you take into account the constant state of fear they lived in, it felt like an eternity. At 16, my dad left Germany, the only home he had ever known. At the time, he didn't truly understand the impact or the permanence of the move, and never could have imagined how many relatives he would never see again. But the journey to America, the land of cowboys, also felt like an adventure to a teenager. Even after their passage was secured, the Nazis had no intention of making the departure process easy. The family was allowed to take belongings they already owned, but could not purchase anything new for their journey. They could take only a limited amount of money per person, $10 for the children, $20 for the adults. And as they packed in their apartment, a Nazi official sat and watched, ready to confiscate any items of interest or value. Finally, in late June 1938, the family left Königsberg, traveling through Breslau and Goslar for farewell visits to relatives on their way to Hamburg. From Hamburg, they took the Manhattan to New York, where cousin Jennings Stein met them. When they arrived in Fort Smith, they were joyfully welcomed by a large group of family members. My father remembers the feeling of finally coming to a place where they were wanted. After years of becoming strangers in their own land, they had found a new home. In Fort Smith, the family worked quickly to acclimate to their new country. Dad got a job at a dental lab, but found he didn't have the sufficient skills to keep up with America's advanced dental technology. At his family's urging, he returned to school, attending a third grade class in the mornings to improve his English, and high school classes in the afternoon. He graduated, went on to junior college, and was recruited to attend Hendrix College with the help of scholarships from the Arkansas Jewish Assembly. My dad has dedicated his life to helping others. He got master's degrees in education and social work and moved around the country working for Jewish and social service organizations. In 1948, he met and married my mom, Hilma, of blessed memory. In 1956, Dad was asked to come to Dallas to work for the Jewish Federation. He left after 4 years to increase his skills in community work. In 1968, Dad was invited back to the Dallas Federation, eventually serving as executive director. His skills in community development and his subsequent groundbreaking work in gerontology made him, to this day, the most honored social worker in Dallas by the National Association of Social Workers. With a wife he was devoted to, 4 daughters, 7 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren, my dad created something that was taken from him in Germany: a home, a life, and a legacy. I now light this candle in honor of my father and in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust.
שלא ייגמר לעולם, החור והים, רשרוש של המים, ורק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החור והים, רשרוש של המים, ורק השמיים, תפילת האדם. Oh Lord my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of man, the sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of man.
Good evening. My name is Casey Bush, and I am a museum educator at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Since I started at the museum, I've gotten to know Ralph Hockley and his wonderful wife, Carolyn, and I am honored to share some of Ralph's story tonight. Ralph was born Rudolf Martin Hockenheimer on October 17, 1925 in Karlsruhe, Germany. He lived with his parents Julius and Lily and his older sister Marianne in a beautiful 3-story house in a nice neighborhood. He remembers family vacations to the lakes in Munich and playing on the street as a child. Things changed for Ralph and his family as soon as Hitler came to power in 1933. The swastika replaced the German flag in his school classroom, and his teacher, the head of the local Nazi party, began making sly remarks about the Jewish students in his class. His friends began to call him a dirty Jew. His father, who was in the butcher supply business, lost half of his clients and felt betrayed by the German nation he had fought bravely for in World War I. It became clear that the family was no longer welcome in their home country simply because they were Jewish. In 1934 to 1935, Ralph's parents left Germany for Marseille, France, hoping to find safety and opportunity. Ralph and Marianne spent almost a year staying with different relatives in Germany and Switzerland before joining their parents. In Marseille, Ralph was placed in a private boys' school to learn French, but quickly finished top of his class and was moved to public school. He remembers having very good friends in school, none of whom ever said a nasty word to him. Eventually, Ralph came to consider himself a French kid and would later take pride in helping with war aid collection efforts. Ralph's parents did their best to make sure their children's lives were as normal as possible in France. Ralph attended school, played with friends, and took part in activities like Boy Scouts. Looking back, he realizes he was shielded from most of the difficulties his parents faced as they tried to establish a normal life. His father sought business opportunities wherever he could, but they were few and far between. Ralph still wonders how they managed to have food on the table each night. As German Jews, Ralph and his family lived in a French neighborhood on a different side of town from most of the French Jews in Marseille. Although they attended synagogue on high holidays, they were never welcome in the local Jewish community life. In 1938, Ralph's mother and father were both arrested while trying to extend their residence visas. His mother was released that night, but his father spent nearly 4 weeks in jail. Though his mother was initially found guilty of being in France illegally, they were both eventually acquitted. When the Germans invaded France in May 1940, Ralph's father was sent to an internment camp at Les Milles. After the fall of France, he was moved to Gurs, a notorious detention camp that saw more than 18,000 Jews pass through its gates. Most Jews who were interned at Gurs between August 1942 and March 1943 were ultimately sent to Auschwitz. Ralph recalls his mother's tenacity and determination to keep their family together. She sold family valuables to keep them afloat, and when Ralph was expelled from school and after the defeat of France in September 1940 because he was German, she offered his services as a volunteer worker for the Quakers, who had set up a relief agency in Marseille. It was this decision, a combination of luck and ingenuity, that Ralph, then 14, credits with saving his family's lives. Since he was fluent in French and German and quickly becoming proficient in English, Ralph's main job was to serve as an interpreter, helping officials process inquiries from people detained in camps. As part of his work, Ralph quickly became the intermediary between the Quakers and the American consulate in Marseille regarding camp inmates' visa matters. There, he was introduced to Hiram Bingham IV, the American vice consul responsible for issuing 2,500 visas without U.S. State Department sanction to refugees fleeing the Nazis. In spring 1941, Bingham told Ralph that he was personally approving visas for his entire family to enter the United States and gave him a letter that would perhaps secure his father's release from Gurs. The letter worked. On May 6, 1941, Ralph and his family left Marseille on the Winnipeg, a Vichy French ship bound for the French West Indies. The ship was captured and taken to Trinidad. From there, Ralph's family made it to New York. To Ralph, coming to the United States was like opening a new chapter in a book. He remembers that America was so appealing to him, not only because his family had relatives there, but because of the ideal of freedom it represented and what it meant to him as someone who had spent so many years under Nazi threat. But Ralph was not satisfied with just accepting the freedom he found in the United States. He wanted to go back to France and fight the Nazis. He went to the draft board the day he turned 18 and reported for active duty on December 29, 1943. He was eventually assigned to intelligence work at Camp Ritchie, Maryland, home of the famous Ritchie boys, and arrived in Europe in April 1945. Ralph was in Paris on May 8, 1945, when the war in Europe ended. He remembers the overwhelming feeling of walking down Champs-Élysées, the same road that Hitler had paraded through in victory 5 years earlier. Ralph returned to the United States in 1946 and got his college degree. He returned to active military service as a lieutenant and was part of the first American Army unit sent to fight in the Korean War in July 1950. He survived 14 months of combat on behalf of his adopted country and the UN. Today, Ralph lives in the Dallas area with his wife Carolyn and cat Bumper. He has 2 children, 3 stepchildren, 12 grandchildren, and 13 great-grandchildren. His first wife, Eva, herself a child escapee from Nazi Germany, died in 1983. He hopes his story inspires young people to realize the powerful impact they can have on the world around them, even at an early age. I light this candle in honor of Ralph Hockley and in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust.
My father, Heinz Wallach, was born in 1920 in Baumbach, Germany. His father, Leopold, was a salesman, his mother, Gerdi, was a homemaker, and he had a younger sister, Liesel. The Wallach family had a long history of service to the German nation. His father, uncles, and grandfather served in the German military, and his father was awarded the Iron Cross during World War I. Baumbach had a small Jewish population of about 10 families, so all of the children in town attended the same elementary school. My father enjoyed school and did not experience any discrimination until Jewish students were separated from Christian students in the mid-1930s. Around the same time, he recalls the gradual stripping away of the rights of the Jews, the boycotts of Jewish businesses, the loss of citizenship, and the confiscation of his own driver's license. In his words, every day something happened to take away life from the Jewish people. His parents considered leaving Germany, but did not have a way to flee and held on to hope that the situation would not worsen. On the night of November 9, 1938, Kristallnacht, they were proven wrong. My father and grandfather were arrested the morning of November 10 and sent to Buchenwald concentration camp. While my grandfather was released after 8 days because of his military record, my father remained in Buchenwald for 2 months. He witnessed brutality that stays with him to this day. Because of his father's service, the German authorities were willing to free my father if he provided proof that he would leave Germany. My grandfather purchased a one-way ticket to New York in my father's name, which was useless without a visa, but secured his release. In January 1939, after signing a document stating that he would not discuss what he saw or experienced in Buchenwald, my father was released. As time passed and he was unable to obtain a visa to go to the United States or any other country, my father knew he had to flee so he would not be sent back to Buchenwald. He traveled to Berlin to join a Zionist organization that helped get young Jews out of Germany into Palestine. At this time, Germany allowed the immigration of young Jewish men if they worked for a time in a labor camp. My father was sent to a farm near Potsdam, which originally was the property of a Jewish family but was confiscated by the Nazis. My father and other young men worked long days with barely enough food to survive. Everything produced was sent to the German army. On August 15, 1940, my father began what would be a long and arduous journey in search of a new homeland, somewhere he could be safe. With 800 other Jews, he boarded a train from Berlin to Vienna. His parents and sister could not travel with him, and he would learn after the war that they did not survive, though how or where they died is still unclear. From Vienna, the group traveled by train to Bratislava, then boarded 3 ships that took them across the Mediterranean Sea. The voyage was fraught with difficulties. The ship didn't have a working compass, leaving much of their journey to the fate and experience of the captain. There was not enough food or water, and the sanitary conditions were deplorable. In my father's words, they were packed on the ship like sardines in a can. On November 1st, the ship reached the territorial waters of Palestine and was immediately intercepted by a British warship. They were escorted to Haifa Bay, where they waited on the ship for days with no offer of supplies or assistance. On November 20th, the British High Commissioner for Palestine issued a deportation order for the Jewish refugees. They were to be sent to a detainment camp on the island of Mauritius. The fugitives were gradually moved onto the Patria, the ship that would take them to Mauritius. The Jewish passengers attempted a number of strategies to prevent the deportation, including hunger strikes, but the British government was unmoved. On November 24th, members of the Haganah, a Jewish paramilitary force in Palestine, smuggled a bomb on board the Patria. They wanted to do just enough damage to the ship to prevent it from leaving Haifa Bay, but the mission did not go according to plan. When the bomb detonated on the morning of November 25th, it blew a large hole in the hull and the ship started sinking in a matter of minutes. The British soldiers brutally forced men, women, and children to the bottom of the sinking ship. More than 267 people who already suffered so terribly drowned. As the ship was sinking, my father jumped overboard. The British did not allow rescuers to approach those who were fighting to stay afloat in the freezing water. Fortunately, a small boat delivering coal to another ship threw my father a life preserver and pulled him up. As soon as he reached the shore, he and other survivors were taken to the Atlit detention camp. Instead of a warm welcome to a new homeland, the refugees were faced with armed guards and barbed wire. My father was in the camp for a year until the British finally released some of the men with the hope of recruiting them for the British Army. For a while, my father lived and worked on a kibbutz not far from Jerusalem before returning to Haifa, where his grandfather, aunt, and 3 cousins resided. In 1944, he met and married my mother, Doris Loeb, also a survivor from Germany. My beloved mother, may her memory be for a blessing, was the love of his life, and they were married for 72 years. In November 1947, my father was recruited by the Haganah during the conflict that followed the end of the British mandate for Palestine. He ran convoys to kibbutzim that were cut off from food and other supplies. After Israel gained its independence in 1948, he continued to serve as an officer in the Israeli Defense Forces in subsequent conflicts, including the Suez Crisis, the Six-Day War, and the Yom Kippur War. My father always asserted that Israel was his homeland, rather than Germany, the nation that massacred his entire family and millions more. He claimed that if not for the land of our ancestors, he would not have survived. My parents never planned on leaving Israel, but they moved to Dallas in 1980 to join our families. They became an integral part of the survivor community, creating it another home for themselves. With 2 daughters, 4 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren, they created a legacy that defied everything the Nazi regime tried to destroy. I now light this candle in honor of my father and in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust.
שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. את כל הנשמות של 6 מיליוני היהודים, חללי השואה באירופה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו ושנספו על קידוש השם בידי המרצוחים הגרמנים הנאצים ועוזריהם משאר העמים. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימים, ונאמר אמן.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה. בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי. בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם לא מהמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה בריחו. לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה. דמירם בימה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה. וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל. ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. ואמרו אמן.
Good evening. I'm Mark Zilberman, and I am honored to serve as board chair of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. On behalf of the board and staff of the museum, I want to thank everyone who participated in this deeply moving ceremony of remembrance. Like Mary Pat, I wish we could have gathered tonight in person, but I look forward to the time when we can be together again. It is my pleasure to support the mission of the museum. During my time on the board, and especially now in my first year as chair, it has been a privilege to witness the growth and evolution of the museum and to be a part of programs like tonight's. To our survivors watching tonight, we owe you a debt of gratitude. You are the reason the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, a dream 40 years in the making, exists today. You are undeniable proof of the power of the human spirit, and we have learned so much from you. As we were creating the plans for the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, it was critical for us to center and honor survivor voices, from the testimony stations in the permanent exhibition, to the Voices of Courage film in our theater, to the Dimensions in Testimony experience. But the museum also serves as a memorial to the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, 6 million people whose voices were silenced, who did not get to live their fullest lives, 1.5 million children who did not get the chance to grow up. We can never truly grasp what we lost, but we can dedicate ourselves to preserving their memory for generations to come. When we consider the tragedy of the Holocaust, the recent rise of anti-Semitism is thrown into sharp relief. We must be diligent not only about blatant acts of hatred, but also about those that might go unnoticed by many. The casual comment, the cutting remark, the off-the-cuff joke, the use of an anti-Semitic trope without understanding its roots. The mission of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum has never been more important. So tonight, we reaffirm our commitment to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference. We know education is the key. We are not born with hatred in our hearts, it is learned. And every student who comes to the museum or engages with us in a virtual classroom can take valuable lessons with them. The story we tell is not just what can happen when hatred goes unchecked, but also what can happen when we stand up for each other, when we see something wrong and work to make it right. We want everyone who comes through our doors to understand that you don't have to be a superhero to be an upstander. I'd like to close our program tonight with gratitude, once more for our survivors for inspiring us, for everyone who works to ensure this history is not forgotten, and for each of you for joining us this evening in remembrance. I would like to thank everyone who participated in tonight's program. Rabbi Stefan Weinberg, Tamar Leventhal, Julie Rabinowitz, Casey Bush, and Cole Rena of Congregation Anshai Torah. I would also like to extend a special thank you to Melissa Plaskoff and On Air Media for their help in creating tonight's virtual program, as well as everyone who so generously supported this commemoration with thoughtful tributes in the program book. I'd now like to light our last memorial candle for the evening. I light this candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
Oh.